Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I'm Simon from Scar Illustration, and I hope you're keeping well. Today I'm going to talk about how I created the portrait from my assassin painting. Let's dive in. I started by filling in the area of the face with a flat color that was roughly the overall skin tone. I thought that perhaps the character would be outside a fair amount of the time, so I wanted to give him a slightly weathered look. Next, I set about putting down some of the darker midtones. I wanted to get a sense of the dimension of the character's face and features right from the get-go. I then started progressively adding in darker tones for the shadow areas, such as under the eyebrows, the nose, the bottom lip, cheekbones, and the chin. I used to start off by putting in the darkest darks and the highlights first, but I found that I get much better results by slowly building up to those tones. Next, it was on to the lighter areas. The face felt a bit long and thin, so I started filling out the sides somewhat. I entertained the idea of perhaps giving the character sideburns, but decided against it in the end. As the character is wearing a hood, I went ahead and added that shadow before I got too far ahead with the rendering of the face. Initially, I went with a fairly dark brown color, but later on changed the color to a more of a mid-red color. I then changed the layer to multiply and reduced the opacity. I found that this effect will give me the most realistic looking shadow. As the character is on a slight angle, I rotated the canvas to make it a bit easier to get the proportions of the face correct. Just adding a subtle red tone to the nose now. Typically, the nose, cheeks, and ears will have a slightly redder tone to them. I also added a blue-gray tone to the jawline to suggest some stubble. Now it was time to start developing the features of the face and adding some more definition. I added some scars to his face to support the character's backstory or narrative. I like to create backstories for all of my characters, as this will tend to inform some of the design choices. I went back and forth on the eyes a few times as I wasn't really happy with how they looked and their relative positioning. For some reason, they just kept on looking cross-eyed to me. As always, I'm continually zooming in and out to check that everything fits together. Now I'm adding some highlights to the nose and the top lip. For the highlights, I usually like to use a brush that has some texture. This is a quote from Howard Pyle, which I've found really helpful. Lights define texture and color. Shadows define form. Turning the shadow layer on and off continually, as well as the sketch layer to check that the painting hasn't veered too far off course. Now developing some of the shadow areas. Softening some of the planes of the face. Also adding in some subtle red tones as the planes turn away from the viewer, and doing the same thing with the chin and jawline with the subtle gray-blue color. On to developing the lips. I find painting lips to be a challenging area of the face to get right. There's lots of different angles and details in such a small area. Bouncing around the face as I see areas that need work. Adding highlights to the top of the lips now. And back to the eyes. Trying to straighten out the pupils somewhat. Once again, turning on the sketch layer to check how things are going. At this point, I was concerned that the face was still looking too long and thin overall, and not how I envisaged the character. So I started filling out the size of the face and accentuating the jawline some more. I also increased the space between the nose and the mouth, as well as shortening the nose. The mouth still seemed a bit too wide, so I shortened that as well. I then flipped the painting to see what areas needed work. As it happened, the whole face seemed to be sliding down to one side, so I went ahead and fixed that by adjusting the angle of the nose, chin, and eyes. I also filled out his neck as well. And then it was on to developing the character's furrows. After zooming out, I noticed that the face seemed a bit too big for the hood area, so I reduced it a bit. I then turned on the shadow layer and flipped the painting to check how it was all looking. I still wasn't happy with the character's right eye, so I duplicated the left one, flipped it, moved it over, which seemed to do the trick. At this point, I was starting to feel that the face was getting closer to what I had in mind at the start of the painting. Just going over the highlight areas of the neck and the face with a chalk brush for texture, and using a softer brush for the shadow areas. It was finally time to zoom in and take care of some of the smaller details. The first thing I tackled was the eyes, as I always tend to notice those first when looking at a portrait, and then darkening off the bottom of the face. Flipping the painting again, and darkening off the jawline a bit more. Smoothing out some of the dark areas so they don't look too sharp and unrealistic. Still repositioning the eyes as they look slightly off when I flip the painting. Correcting the shadow edge as it was too short. Adding some more texture into the highlight areas. Finally, I added some saturation and lightened the entire portrait. With this portrait, I wanted to convey a sense of foreboding and menace, whilst giving the impression that the character was a seasoned professional. Hope this was helpful, and let me know if you have any questions in the comments below. Please consider liking this video and subscribe to my channel. Have a good one, and keep on painting.